For a long time in modern economics, inequality was seen like bad weather. Not pleasant, sometimes dangerous, but ultimately natural. It was believed that markets would fix it over time. As the economy grew, everyone's share was assumed to grow as well, so it was treated as something not worth worrying too much about. Until one economist did something very simple, but very important. He stopped looking at the economy through decades. Instead, he looked at centuries. Welcome to Finance and History, a place where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it seems. This video is the story of Thomas Piketty, and how his work quietly dismantled one of the most comfortable assumptions in modern economics. The idea that capitalism naturally spreads wealth over time. This is not a story about ideology. It is not a story about left versus right. It is a story about what happens when you follow the data long enough. For much of the 20th century, mainstream economics focused on growth, productivity, output, efficiency. The logic was simple. If the economic pie grows, eventually everyone will get a bigger slice. If inequality appeared, it was seen as temporary, a stage of development, a side effect of progress, or simply a measurement problem. And for a while, history seemed to support that idea. After World War II, inequality fell rapidly across Europe and the United States. Wages increased, the middle class expanded, home ownership rose, wealth concentration declined. Economists looked at that period and quietly assumed, this must be how advanced capitalism works. But there was a problem with that assumption. The memory was too short. What Piketty did was not philosophical, it was archival. He did not start with theories, he started with tax records, government archives, income statistics, national accounts. And he did this not just for one country, but for many countries across hundreds of years. When he put all the data together, a very different picture appeared. The post-war period was not the norm, it was an exception. For most of modern history, wealth had been far more concentrated than economists like to admit. Take the 19th century, for example. The era of Jane Austen novels, the rise of the Industrial Revolution, but also a world dominated by inherited wealth. Working was not what mattered most. Owning capital was. The decline in inequality after 1914 did not happen because markets suddenly became fair. The reason was far harsher. Wars destroyed fortunes, inflation erased debts, taxes increased dramatically, governments intervened in the economy at massive scale. Equality did not arrive politely. It arrived through shocks. And once those forces faded, inequality began rising again. At this point, Piketty asked a simple but uncomfortable question. Why does wealth tend to concentrate over time, even in democratic market economies? He treated this not as a moral question, but as a mechanical one. To answer it, he made a crucial distinction. Labor and capital. Labor is the income you earn by working. Wages, salaries, income tied to your time. Capital is what you own. Houses, land, stocks, businesses, bonds. Assets that generate income simply by existing. And at the center of the system lies a quiet asymmetry. Labor has limits. You can only work a certain number of hours. Your productivity cannot increase infinitely. Your income rises slowly. But capital is different. Capital compounds. It does not need to work harder. It does not need to show up to work. It does not need retraining. It simply needs to exist. Piketty's most famous idea appears here. Often simplified into a slogan, but actually very straightforward. If the return on capital is consistently higher than the growth rate of the economy. Wealth accumulated in the past grows faster than income earned through work today. That may sound technical, but the meaning is simple. If you already own assets, your wealth tends to grow faster than the economy. If you do not, you are constantly trying to catch a train that keeps accelerating away. This is not a conspiracy, it is mathematics. And in the long run, mathematics usually wins. Piketty's data showed that this was not theoretical. The same pattern appeared again and again throughout history. Before the 20th century, inherited wealth dominated economic life. Wars and political interventions reduced inequality. Then growth slowed, capital recovered, and the old pattern returned. Which is why his 2013 book, Capital in the 21st Century, created such a huge impact, because it challenged one of the central stories modern societies tell themselves. The story that inequality is mainly about talent and effort, and that markets reward contribution. Piketty showed something different. Markets are very good at creating wealth, but they are also very good at expanding existing wealth, especially in low-growth economies. When growth is high, wages can rise as well, but when growth slows, capital keeps growing, and labor becomes quieter. Suddenly, many modern realities start to make sense. Housing prices rise, but renters do not benefit. The stock market rises, but those without assets gain nothing. Inheritance becomes increasingly important. Opportunity begins to depend less on talent and more on timing, not how hard you work, but what you own. Compound interest does not care how hard you work. Piketty's work made many people uncomfortable. Critics argued he was too pessimistic. They said innovation would disrupt old fortunes, and yes, sometimes it does. But Piketty's point was different. Individual success stories do not define the system, average outcomes do. And the averages showed something clear: if returns on assets remain high while growth slows. Wealth moves away from labor. Ownership becomes more important than contribution. Timing becomes more important than effort. At this point, the discussion stops being purely academic, because suddenly many modern problems become easier to understand. Why housing feels increasingly unaffordable. Why stock markets rise while wages stagnate. Why inheritance is becoming more decisive. In a low-growth world, capital does not need many opportunities to win. It only needs time. Piketty's message was actually very simple. Inequality does not disappear on its own. Unless something actively counteracts it, it reproduces itself. Markets do not distribute outcomes equally. They distribute returns to ownership. Understanding this does not force you into a political position, but it does change how you think about risk, opportunity, and security. Because if wealth tends to concentrate, financial literacy cannot only be about budgeting or saving. It must also include understanding how assets grow, how compounding works, and how long-term trends overpower short-term effort. Piketty's real contribution was not explaining why inequality exists. It was explaining how inequality reproduces itself. And once you see that mechanism, the questions begin to change. Not how hard should I work, but what do I own? Not is the economy growing, but who captures that growth? History may not repeat exactly, but capital has habits, and one of its strongest habits is accumulation. When left uninterrupted, wealth tends to gather where it already exists. If this video gave you a new perspective, don't forget to subscribe.